Go ahead.
Через минуту запрет ИКВ, напоминаю.
In 1 minute, you will inhibit the IKV horizon sensors. Just a reminder, copy that. We have prepared the command already. Copy.
Just under 15 minutes away from the planned ignition of the engine on the Soyuz spacecraft for that deorbit burn, and planned to be a 4-minute, 40-second burn, and that just designed to alter the alter the trajectory of the spacecraft's orbit, basically shallowing it up until the end part of their orbit, as they were to complete a revolution around the globe, is actually down on the ground. This just to initiate that re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. Once the deorbit burn is completed, they'll begin to descend through the Earth's atmosphere just a few minutes later. A little less than 30 minutes after that deorbit burn, when they're 422 kilometers in altitude, the modules themselves will separate, with two of them, the very top portion, the orbital module, and the very bottom portion, that propulsion module, separating and ultimately burning up in the Earth's atmosphere, just leaving that central portion. And then throughout that time, and actually sometimes before, it's quite common for the voice communication with the spacecraft to start to get a little bit degraded, a little bit spottier, especially as they eventually, just about 4 minutes after separation, enter into the plasma stage, as they are well within atmospheric entry, so under about 100 kilometers or about 62 miles in altitude. We're just a little under 12 minutes and counting now away from the deorbit burn. Getting a couple more questions in. Jen on Twitter wanted to know if the astronauts are able to observe the Geminid meteor shower, which is currently, I was just peeking this evening, if they're able to observe it from the International Space Station. They are sometimes, obviously depending on where they are over the Earth at any given time. There's also a payload on board the International Space Station known as the Meteor Experiment that is constantly taking images and video of the Earth below, with a camera pointing down towards the Earth's surface from the station itself, doing the first space-based observations of meteors and the environment that they persist in immediately beneath the station in low Earth orbit. And Jackson on Twitter wanted to know how long the flight from space to Earth is. And for this evening, it'll be just under 3.5 hours. So just under 3.5 hours from undocking to the International Space Station until they are landed back down on the ground on planet Earth. So a pretty quick trip for them, considering they're going from space to right back down to the ground. Could actually be accomplished even quicker, but just the way the orbits typically line up for these operations, takes a little under 3.5 hours. And then Ian on Twitter wanted to know how the astronauts fight muscle atrophy. That's a very good question, as anybody who follows along and sees the crew members on the International Space Station, they are in that microgravity environment, so without gravity constantly pulling down on you, things like bones and muscles can start to degrade. So the crew members actually have a number of countermeasures on board the space station itself, including a weightlifting device known as the ARED, the Advanced Resistive Exercise Device. They're able to use to help combat the negative effects of weightlessness, actually simulate weightlifting, putting that strain and that stress on their muscles and their bones to help keep them healthy and strong, so that by the time they return to Earth from a very long stint in space, they don't have to deal with those negative consequences. For now, though, 9.5 minutes away from the planned start of the deorbit burn, and that'll be about a 4-minute, 40-second firing of the engines on the Soyuz spacecraft. Everything continuing to go very smoothly with tonight's landing operations. The teams over in Koryov at Mission Control Moscow overseeing the operations, and inside the craft, Sergei Ryazanskiy, the Russian cosmonaut and commander of the Soyuz vehicle, flanked right now by NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik, the Expedition 53 commander, and Paolo Nespoli, the European astronaut from the European Space Agency.
Marie, we are waiting for your report on the maneuver indicator. Yes, it's illuminated, and we are sending K3 command. Copy. And it's complete. Copy. Marie, what? Please report on the attitude for the periscope. Oh, we are still in eclipse. Copy.
We are just about 7 minutes away from the planned ignition of that deorbit burn. We're actually just under an hour now from the planned landing in Kazakhstan. Again, the landing is targeted for 2:37 a.m. Central Time, 3:37 a.m. Eastern. And the next major milestone coming up in just a little over 6.5 minutes with the deorbit burn. But right now, Bresnik, Ryazanskiy, and Nespoli still on board the Soyuz MS-05. Everything continuing smoothly. Just heard him conversing with the flight controllers in Mission Control Moscow, who will be overseeing the events. The station and the Soyuz just about to cross over the southern tip of South Africa, where they'll be firing the engines. And if you actually follow that ground track on the screen, you can see they'll be passing right over Kazakhstan. And right now we're just a little under 4 minutes and counting now from that deorbit burn. Already getting reports that the search and recovery forces starting to mobilize over in Kazakhstan. They'll be making their way over towards the landing zone and then set up in position to greet the arriving crew members and then pull them out of the vehicle once they've arrived. Everything's still going very smoothly with the Soyuz spacecraft. That deorbit burn, the next major milestone coming up, the 4-minute and 40-second firing of its main engine. So we'll continue to stand by, just a little over 3 minutes away. And while we wait, we'll enjoy a couple of views from the International Space Station. Again, just now crossing over the southern tip of South America.
Борей, проверьте ориентацию.
Sorry, please check the attitude
Местный вертикаль.
one more time using the local vertical. Yes, everything is nominal. Copy.
Параметры КДУ проверьте.
Check the KDU parameters. We checked and everything is nominal. Copy.
Во время работы СКД ведите репортаж.
Please report during SKD operation, preferably every 15 seconds. Report on the burn that you input. Copy.
And we're coming up on just 1 minute until the beginning of the burn. We'll stand by for confirmations from the visiting vehicle officer here in Houston, working in concert with the teams that you're looking at over here in Mission Control Moscow. We're going to be overseeing the vehicle and talking directly with the crew on board throughout the rest of the night's activities.
We have the message of cover open on the thruster. Copy.
Если G3 не горит, то выдаем G3.
And if G3 is not illuminated, then you have a go to end it. We send the command. SKD cover is open. Copy that. And now select the display the monitor and maneuver. Yes, it has been done. Copy. We have SKD activation. Copy. KDU parameters are nominal. We have 047. Copy.
And confirmation the deorbit burn has started right on schedule.
And 9 meters.
Again, this burn expected to last 4 minutes and 40 seconds. So keeping in theme with tonight's activities, everything going right on the timeline. The deorbit burn has begun.
Nominal.
Getting good reports, nominal or normal so far.
Copy. 45 seconds of burn magnitude and 26 meters, and KDU parameters are nominal. 1 minute, 27.2 meters. Schedule parameters nominal and 63 kilograms of propellant used. Schedule parameters are nominal, and we have 1.5 minutes into the burn. 43.9 meters, 95 kilograms of propellant used. Copy. Schedule parameters are nominal, and 2 minutes into the burn.
So again, 2 minutes, so almost halfway into the deorbit burn. Everything going as planned, everything going smoothly so far. You'll continuously hear the word nominal as long as everything is going according to plan. Just another word for things going as expected. Inside Paolo Nespoli, Sergei Ryazanskiy, Randy Bresnik executing the deorbit burn, just about one step closer now to returning home.
5 minutes into the burn, 69.1 meters, 158 kilograms of propellant used. Copy. Done with the first section, 78.6 meters for the burn. Schedule parameters are nominal. 3 minutes into the burn, 82.5 meters. Copy. Schedule parameters are nominal. 147. 3 minutes 30 seconds. 97 meters and 222 kilograms of propellant used. Copy. Schedule parameters are nominal. MS-048. 4 minutes. And 111 meters and 254 kilograms. Copy. Schedule parameters are nominal. MS-048. 4.5 minutes. 126.1 meters. Expecting deca. We have deca. We copy. Thermal sensors have been connected. Separation, we have goal for separation for the cyclogram. We have pressure drop in BO. The pressure in SR is stable. Now we are working for page 56. Copy. SR pressure is stable, 771. BO pressure is 260, even and dropping. Copy.
And so the deorbit burn completed successfully. All reports coming in that it was nominal or normal, going according to the plan, as pretty much everything so far tonight has continued to do. So with that deorbit burn complete, now well on their way to that landing in Kazakhstan. That deorbit burn setting the vehicle up, changing its trajectory to where it's soon going to be entering the Earth's atmosphere, at which point it'll break apart. Two of the pieces, the top and the bottom, breaking off to burn up in the Earth's atmosphere, separating an altitude of about 140 kilometers. The middle section, the descent module, continuing down with the crew on board, entering through the plasma, exiting, and eventually getting the command to open the parachute at an altitude just under 11 kilometers. Just after the drogue chute has done its job, the main parachute will deploy and continue to slow the vehicle down, ultimately getting it down to a much slower speed before the soft landing engines fire just about a meter over the ground, completing the landing activity and letting them touch down in Kazakhstan.
Check the time. We can hardly copy. Please repeat one more time.
Время ГК.
GK time, please.
Какое время ГК?
Do you have it?
Посмотрите.
Please check. Stand by. We're going to check.
So we'll continue to get performance calls from the crew on board. A lot of these coming from Sergei Ryazanskiy, the Soyuz commander.
Copy 10, 49, 36.
He's flanked by NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik and European Space Agency astronaut Paolo Nespoli. It is likely that communication could become a bit degraded or even unavailable in the next 5 to 10 minutes or so, but that is expected. Eventually lining up for the separation of those modules. That'll be the next kind of milestone on our checklist, and that's targeted to come at 8:12, or rather 2:12 a.m. Central Time, 3:12 a.m. Eastern Time, 8:12 over in Moscow. But this just kind of gives you a breakdown of what's coming up. So again, they had that deorbit burn, and we'll have a final braking impulse, and then those modules will separate, and then the reentry will begin. They'll hit what's commonly defined as atmospheric reentry, so really when you can start seeing the atmosphere's effects on the vehicle's trajectory and begin really slowing it down. That comes at about 100 kilometers, which is equivalent to about 62 statute miles. After that, it'll do a controlled descent using thrusters on board to control the vehicle's reentry attitude. When it's actually in what's known as the plasma, you'll generally lose all communications, eventually regaining once the parachutes have been deployed and communications are able to be established with one of the circling fixed-wing aircraft, which will be in the area around the landing zone. Landing, though, just about 43 minutes away from now, if everything continues to follow the timeline as it has so far tonight with all of our activities. So that means Randy Bresnik, Sergei Ryazanskiy, and Paolo Nespoli just under 43 minutes from getting out of a capsule and breathing the air on planet Earth for the first time in 139 days. These views coming from the International Space Station, still on roughly the same orbit as the Soyuz spacecraft itself. The pair of spacecraft just crossing over the Atlantic and about to swing up right through Central Africa, over the Arabian Peninsula, and then eventually for the station passing right over Kazakhstan. And then for the Soyuz spacecraft with 3 crew members on board descending through the Earth's atmosphere for a touchdown in the central part of the country. And here just another look at the location of that landing site. It's just to the east-southeast of Zhezkazgan, a team where search and recovery forces have already departed, and they'll be standing by at the landing site. But everything continuing to go smoothly. We're about 38 minutes away and counting from the targeted landing time, and we'll continue to follow along. Again, at this point, communication expected to be degraded or even unavailable as they move quite a ways out of range, not only from ground stations still, but also from the International Space Station itself. But we'll look to hopefully reacquire communications, but not uncommon to go through the next several stages without constant comm from the crew members. But again, the next major milestone coming up in about 12 minutes, and that will be the command to separate the modules, separating the central descent module with the crew members inside from the orbital and the propulsion modules, which will break off and then ultimately burn up in the Earth's atmosphere.
Copy that, Moscow.
This a quick breakdown that you can see again in that center portion. The descent module, the 3 crew members seated side by side. It's the only portion of the spacecraft that survives the heat of reentry, with the heat shield on the bottom part, so essentially where their backs are in this image, protecting them from that intense heat of reentry. And then the parachutes also on board to slow their descent once they're through the initial entry through the Earth's atmosphere, through the plasma stage, and able to slow them down, ultimately doing that final slowing with those soft landing engines. But everything going by the book so far, by the timeline, and will continue to stand by as they start to begin their trip down through the Earth's atmosphere, about 36.5 minutes away from the targeted landing time.
Thank you. We copy.
Just 35 minutes away now from the targeted landing time in Kazakhstan. Sergei Ryazanskiy, Paolo Nespoli, and Randy Bresnik on board, getting ready to touch down on planet Earth for the first time in 139 days. And we are expecting a pretty brisk welcome for them weather-wise once they're down at the landing site. Again, most recent weather reports looking at temperatures hovering around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with the wind bringing it down to a wind chill of just about -5. So definitely going to be a cold welcome for them, but the search and recovery force is going to be standing by to get them out, keep them bundled up, and then move them on to their next set of activities. Typically, once they're out of the capsule, they'll get some quick medical data, some quick medical readings from each of the crew members before whether moving them into an inflatable medical tent just a few yards away from the actual landing spot that'll get erected by the search and recovery forces. And then following all of the checkouts there, they'll load them into Russian Mi-8 helicopters and begin the trek back to Karaganda, where these crew members will then load onto planes from either NASA or GCTC, the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center, and begin their trips home. Now, though, just a little over 33.5 minutes away from landing, everything's still going smoothly. The Soyuz MS-05 vehicle performing exactly as expected, ticking off each of its milestones right on the timeline so far this evening, starting with those hatches closing several hours ago, undocking, and the most recent one, that deorbit burn, being completed successfully. So in just about 8 minutes, we should start hearing some calls for the separation of the modules, which again will break off 2 of the modules. The top and bottom will separate from the center descent module. Those 2 will burn up during the re-entry, leaving the descent module and the crew members protected by that heat shield to continue flying through the Earth's atmosphere, eventually for that parachute-assisted landing in Kazakhstan.
Борей, Moscow.
Продолжайте вести репортаж.
Go ahead. The visors and helmets are closed. The KSS automatic is activated. Copy that.
Не забудьте перед разделением отжать тангента и клавишу передачи.
Don't forget before the separation to release the push-to-talk button. Could you please repeat your last, Moscow?
Принято. Ну все, работайте по бортовой документации.
Well, please follow the procedures. We did not copy you, Moscow.
Работаем по БД.
Follow the procedures, guys. Copy. We will follow the procedures.
Хорошо.
Sounds good. Copy.
So just there, picking back up communications with the Soyuz spacecraft. Just about 5 minutes away now from the module separation, the next major milestone in tonight's events. And we are under 30 minutes away now from touchdown and landing in Kazakhstan.
In 2 minutes, we're standing by for the separation program. Copy. We confirm.
We have controlled descent flag and the separation flag. Copy.
So in just about a minute, we should start hearing reports of the separation of the modules. By the time that happens, they'll have already dropped almost 100 or almost 300 kilometers in height since starting the deorbit burn. That coming in an altitude of about 422 kilometers, and then the actual separation occurring at about 140.
We have separation. Copy. Separation.
And so with that call, the crew on board the Soyuz spacecraft confirming separation. So two of those modules, the orbital and the lower propulsion module, separating away from the Soyuz, and those two are going to burn up upon re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere, leaving the descent module and the three crew members inside, protected by the heat shield, now getting ready to begin their fiery re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere for that touchdown in Kazakhstan. So another milestone ticked off the list, coming right on time as expected, right at about 2:12 a.m. Central Time. So with that, they're less than 140 kilometers in altitude, going to continue to descend. Things will pick up. They'll begin what's known as atmospheric re-entry at 100 kilometers. That should come in about 2 minutes, about a minute and a half from now.
Buddy, what was the delta TVN?
So again, at this point, the Soyuz spacecraft separated, only the descent module remaining now to descend through the Earth's atmosphere. The three crew members on board, Randy Bresnik of NASA, Sergei Ryazanskiy of Roscosmos, and Paolo Nespoli of ESA, the the European Space Agency. Nespoli, an Italian astronaut. Just a little under 23 minutes away from their targeted landing time. At this point, they're entering into what's known as entry interface, which comes at an altitude of about 100 kilometers or 62 miles. That's a little over 326,000 feet in altitude. Just a couple of minutes, about 3 minutes after the modules have separated. This is where the Earth's atmosphere starts to have noticeable effects on the descending spacecraft. So at this point in the timeline, the Soyuz spacecraft entry into plasma has begun, already down to an altitude of about 80 kilometers or just under 50 miles. For the astronauts on board, they'll start to see the fiery heat of reentry out the windows of the Soyuz spacecraft. After this plasma phase is completed, they'll get much closer to opening up the parachutes. First, the drogue chute coming to begin the initial slowing, followed by the main parachute. All of those commands coming when they're just a little over 10 kilometers over the Earth's surface. And all of that ultimately setting up for that final soft landing engine firing about a meter above the ground for that touchdown in Kazakhstan. But we are just a little over 20 minutes away from the targeted landing time for these three crew members, returning after 139 days on board the station. So again, the descent module from the Soyuz still in that plasma stage, using the Earth's atmosphere as a braking device to slow down from that orbital velocity of over 17,000 miles an hour to a much more manageable speed, allowing the parachutes to slow the vehicle to its final descent velocities. Should be exiting the plasma in about 3 minutes, a little under 3 minutes from now, at which point they'll experience the maximum G forces, pulling about 4 to 5 Gs, and they'll be at an altitude of about 20.5 miles, or a little over 108,000 feet over the Earth's surface. Just a hair under 17 minutes away from landing. Should be just about a minute until they exit from the plasma stage and again experience kind of that maximum G-force load to the crew. By that point, they'll be just about 33 kilometers over the Earth's surface in altitude, a little over 20.5 miles.
Body MCT Moscow.
So at this point in their descent, experiencing the maximum G-force that they should see during this return trip home. Should be exiting from the plasma stage now.
How do you copy? The G load is inaudible. Body Moscow. Body Moscow.
Middle, so what's right?
Body Moscow. Body Moscow.
So hearing the beacon signal from the Soyuz spacecraft, the
You please provide reports the atmospheric mist. How do you copy, Body?
and the Russian mission controller is working now to reestablish that voice communication. They should be giving the command to open the parachutes at this moment. Seeing the animation there on the front screen of the Mission Control Center in Moscow. So the parachute command being given at an altitude of about 6.5 miles or just over 34,000 feet. So around where commercial airliners tend to cruise. Pilot parachutes extract the drogue chute, which works to slow the Soyuz from a descent rate of 230 meters per second all the way down to 80 meters per second, followed closely after by the main parachute, which is going to slow the Soyuz all the way down to a much more manageable 7.2 meters per second. Its harness keeps the Soyuz at an angle of about 30 degrees initially just to dispel the excess heat, and then will snap forward and shift the Soyuz to a straight vertical descent until its eventual touchdown. And so for now, we're a little under 13 minutes away from the anticipated touchdown of the Soyuz spacecraft, the descent module in Kazakhstan. We'll continue to stand by and hopefully get video from the landing zone. Not uncommon in the winter landings to have to wait a little bit longer to get that video signal. And almost as if they read my mind, there we see the Soyuz spacecraft under parachutes.
Body Moscow.
And again, getting some good early video. You could see the Soyuz expelling some of that heat still from that reentry. This is now out of the plasma and fully under its main parachute, continuing to descend. Clear skies look to be greeting the Soyuz spacecraft as they'll soon be on the ground in colder temperatures. But again, this main parachute going to slow the descent of the Soyuz spacecraft down to all the way to 7.2 meters per second.
Pressure is dropping.
And the Soyuz continuing to descend under that parachute, just about 8.5 minutes away from the planned landing. And we went off real quick and confirmed with our visiting vehicle officer. Some of the plumes you saw coming out was actually the Soyuz venting some of the excess attitude control thruster gassing, believed to be hydrogen peroxide used for that control. So that's what we were seeing. Quite rare to get video this early, so kind of a treat for us to be able to see that. But continuing to descend under that main parachute, continuing to slow. Again, this to slow it most of the way down. And then when the vehicle is just about a meter above the ground, we'll fire those soft landing engines to fire to a final descent rate of about 1.5 meters per second before that final touchdown. And the comm that we're hearing still a bit ratty, but we did get confirmation from the search and recovery forces that they have confirmed good two-way communication with the crew on board, continuing their slow descent towards the Earth's surface. Just about 6.5 minutes from now, it should be on the ground. And we should be just about 5 minutes away from touchdown of the descent module of the Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft. NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik on board, along with Russian cosmonaut Sergei Ryazanskiy and Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli.
Pressure in 528 and the altitude is 520.
Вот как твои уши. Хорошо, спасибо.
Paolo, what about your ears? They're fine. Thank you. Altitude is 2,000 even, and the pressure in SR is 508, 587.
Capsule continuing to descend about 3 minutes and 20 seconds. The anticipated touchdown.
Затяните ремни, если не затянули до конца. Принц 1200.
1,200 meters. Copy.
McCall, 1,200 meters in altitude still, continuing to slowly float down under that main parachute. The 3 crew members inside. Once they're down on the ground, the search and recovery forces will move in quite rapidly to begin getting them out of the capsule. Should be on the ground in about 2 minutes.
спасибо.
We copy. Thank you.
And with about 1 minute away from the anticipated landing time, should hopefully start to see some terrain come into view soon. We are expecting a bit of snow on the ground for their return, as is sometimes common in the December months over in Kazakhstan.
You ready on the chute, Sergey?
Standing by for landing.
3 раз.
And touchdown. Landing confirmed, 2:37 a.m. Central, 3:37 a.m. Eastern. Randy Bresnik, Sergei Ryazanskiy, and Paolo Nespoli back on planet Earth after a successful stay on board the International Space Station. And so as we saw those soft landing engines firing, kicking up a bit of dust right before they touched down, firing about a meter off the ground and putting the crew members safely down on the steppe of Kazakhstan. So now we'll start to see search and recovery forces move in, begin extracting the crew and doing their initial medical checkouts before getting them loaded into helicopters off to Karaganda and then onto planes back to home base. But for now, the crew members on the ground will stand by and should hopefully be getting some video from closer up at the landing zone. So then, although you can't see it right now, the capsule just on the other side of one of these ridges in front of us, as you can see, definitely some snow on the ground with some of the grass poking out there in the Kazakh steppe. We were expecting maybe a couple of inches of powder on the ground at the landing zone. The last weather report from the area had temperatures around 10 degrees Fahrenheit, with any wind in the vicinity bringing it down to a wind chill of about -5. Just there, you can see a helicopter already moving in. We should start to see more of those as they converge on the landing zone with the capsule down on the ground. Again, that landing time right on the timeline, 2:37 a.m. Central Time, 3:37 a.m. Eastern. A convoy of vehicles will start arriving. Teams traveling to the landing zone in Russian Mi-8 helicopters as well as all-terrain vehicles. So the first helicopters arriving on site, more to follow, along with all-terrain vehicles carrying specialists trained to handle the Soyuz spacecraft, as well as medical personnel and other support individuals from the various space agencies to begin extracting the crew and then doing their initial medical checks there in the field. Team members from all three space agencies with a landing crew member, NASA, Roscosmos, and ESA, the European Space Agency, traveling out to the landing zone on these helicopters. And the international contingent going to work together to, again, extract these crew members, do some initial medical checks, and then typically during the colder months, their stays at the landing zone will be pretty brief, as many of the landing team members not wanting to stay in the frigid temperatures, but will soon be packing the everything up, getting the crew members off into the helicopters, and begin moving them back to the city of Karaganda, which is about a 2.5 or 3 hour helicopter ride from the landing zone typically. And once there, the crew members able to do some additional medical checks, participate in a welcoming ceremony, and then load up on planes. There on the board in Mission Control Moscow, yes, Posadka, roughly translating to "we have a landing." But again, everything went very smoothly with today's landing operation. The capsule touching down at 2:37 a.m. Central, 3:37 a.m. Eastern. And now all of the search and recovery forces converging, and we should hopefully get some views of the crews coming out of the capsule in the not too distant future. So still getting views from a stationary camera that was able to give pretty unprecedented looks at the Soyuz as it descended under parachute from a much higher altitude than we're accustomed to actually getting these views, especially during the winter months. And hopefully as additional search and recovery forces move into the landing zone, we'll be getting some video from a little bit closer to the landing site. And as soon as we get that, we'll be bringing it to you here on NASA TV. But successful landing, everything looked great with the descent of the Soyuz spacecraft and the crew. Communication with them was established by the search and recovery forces. That touchdown coming at 2:37 a.m. Central Time, so just a little under 10 minutes ago, with the Soyuz spacecraft performing admirably, checking off each of its milestones throughout the night, right along the timeline all the way down to that pinpoint landing in the Kazakh steppe. So we'll continue to stand by and see these crew members get their first breath of fresh air in a little over 6 months. As they're a little under 6 months as they prepare to exit the Soyuz spacecraft and begin the long trip home.
Посмотри за кабелем, я сейчас его подтягивать буду. Вот.
And so we're continuing to stand by. A lot of the search and recovery forces continuing to make their way down to the landing zone, either in the Russian Mi-8 helicopter or in one of the all-terrain vehicles. We should hopefully be getting some video from the landing zone momentarily, as we did get some pretty spectacular views of the Soyuz spacecraft, the descent module as it came down under the parachute, but we'll stand by for just a couple of more minutes and hopefully start seeing the crew members, Randy Bresnik, Sergei Ryazanskiy, and Paulo Nespoli, making their way out of the spacecraft, and as they have now returned to planet Earth. And there it is. The descent module of the Soyuz MS-05 spacecraft landed upright. Search and recovery forces now working to get the hatch open. Looks like they have it and already getting some gloves out from the crew members inside. As it is upright, they erect a stand around it that actually has a small slide, as you can see right there, that they'll be able to pass the crew members down one at a time. And again, as you can see, some snow on the ground there. The temperature is well below freezing, hovering right around 10 degrees Fahrenheit as per the latest weather report from the area.
The hatch is open.
And since the hatch is open, they'll start pulling the crew members out one by one. They'll get loaded into chairs waiting right next to the capsule. And with the frigid weather, usually quite a few blankets standing by as well to keep them warm.
Okay, let's start.
Могу, но мне же не дают. Разрешите?
Ну, тихонечко, вытряхивайте ноги, чтобы в глаза не попало.
Just make sure you don't have snow in your boots when you go up there.
So it's when you carry range. Yes.
And the first crew member making his way out of the hatch. And again, they'll begin extracting the crew members one at a time, passing them down what's essentially a small slide on the stand to get them off of the top of the Soyuz spacecraft.
Be careful, please. Are you ready?
And the Soyuz commander, Sergei Ryazanskiy, first one out the door.
I'm ready. Be careful.
And again, the crew members are going to be carried one at a time to these chairs waiting by, just a few feet away from the capsule. And once in those chairs, they'll be attended to by medical personnel on site who just get initial readings, vital signs, things of that nature to check the crew members out as they've just completed their journey home. With Ryazanskiy out, two more, Bresnik and Nespoli, still inside the capsule, should be seeing them momentarily.
How are you feeling? I'm feeling great.
Еще раз. Да. Кто сейчас работает?
Paolo. This will be Paolo.
Looks like Paolo Nespoli is going to be the next up. You can see some of the NASA landing contingent standing by, their blue flight suits. Members from the European Space Agency also on hand. It's Paolo Nespoli, the Italian astronaut, who just completed his second long-duration space flight on board the space station. He's going to be next out of the capsule.
Did you see Charles? Romain?
Hey, да. Спасибо. I believe 2 years ago, this time you and Ted and Tim launched. It was a lot better weather though. 2 years ago? The 15th of December 2015, yeah. Apollo.
Hey, Sergey, Evgeny, did I tell you I got that phone, that sad call out to Doug? Told him everything was okay? So I gave Doug a sad phone call.
So that should be Paolo Nespoli, second out of the capsule, making his way down shortly.
I didn't get a chance to call the IMC, though. I told him to relay it. Okay.
Yeah. Hey, Paolo. Yeah.
Italian astronaut Paolo Nespoli making his way down now, again, fresh off of his second long-duration space flight on board the station, well in excess of 300 days in space spent in his lifetime. And so with 2 of the 3 out, that leaves 1 more. It'll be NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik. Should get our first sight of him shortly. There you can actually get a good view of the parachute harness and then the window into the Soyuz spacecraft. And you can see the charred edges which develop during the fiery reentry through that plasma stage. The capsule keeping the astronauts safe during that plunge through the Earth's atmosphere, setting them up for this landing in Kazakhstan.
Could you please move away a little bit?
And last but not least, we just saw him come out of the capsule, NASA astronaut Randy Bresnik, arms in the air, excited to be back down here on Earth. He's going to move over and join Nespoli and Ryazanskiy in the chairs. Again, get those initial checkouts And with that, all 3 crew members out of the capsule. That descent stage of the Soyuz MS-05 on Earth now empty. The 3 crew members returned home. Now, along with all of the NASA folks out there, my colleague Brandy Dean braving the elements, and she's tied in right now via satellite phone. Brandy, if you can hear me, how's everything looking down there at the landing site? Certainly looks a little colder than Texas.
It is excessively cold, but everybody's really excited to be here, Dan. As you saw, Bresnik just came out of the capsule. He was the last, and he's definitely in good spirits. I don't know if you could hear his hoorah that he gave as he came out, but he is glad to be back. I know he had a great time on orbit, and of course, Paulo, Nespoli, and Sergei Ryazanskiy also out, and everyone looking good. It's cold, but it's bright and sunny. It's a nice day for a landing.
I was going to say, we ended up getting video really early into the descent, and I mean, the skies look clear. Were there any issues getting the helicopters or anything out there today? It could be kind of dicey during these December landings.
No, everything went really smoothly. I could see from the helicopter I was in the capsule coming down, and like within seconds, I saw an ATV pulling up to it. So everybody was right on the ball.
All right, well, now that we got the crew members out, what do you see around? Do they have the medical tent erected, or what's it looking like is up next for these crew members now that they're out of the capsule?
Yeah, they've got the medical tent up and ready. I'm sure they'll be taking the crew members off to it pretty soon. I know that once they get into it, they are not going to be doing the field test that we've seen the crew members doing in the past mini landings. Instead, they're just going to be getting out of their so-called entry suits and into some street clothes, basically, for the helicopter ride back to the airport. So it shouldn't be too long that they'll have to be out here in the cold, and then they can get onto the helicopter for the ride back.
And do you know, are you guys heading back to Ryazanskiy, or are you going to be able to make the trip back to Karaganda for the planes?
We're expecting to make the trip back to Karaganda.
All right. Well, thanks for calling in. Hope you're staying warm over there, and hope everything goes well with the flight back, and hope to see you back here in warmer pastures here in Texas soon, Brandy.
Thanks, Dan.
All right, and again, that was NASA Public Affairs Officer Brandy Dean there on the scene at the landing zone. All 3 crew members out, getting a look now at Sergei Ryazanskiy there, the NASA astronaut. Randy Bresnik, as she let us know, gave a hoorah once he got out of the capsule. Just completed his 2nd space flight, his first long-duration one, and his first stint as the commander of the International Space Station.
Just remember, everything is being recorded. Randy, there's Rebecca. Everything is being recorded.
And then there, Paolo Nespoli again. All of the crew members right now in the seats here. Bresnik getting a chance to talk on a satellite phone. They'll get just some initial medical checkouts by flight surgeons and nurses there on the scene with the landing forces. And as Brandy reported, the medical tent, an inflatable orange tent, is set up nearby, where they'll be able to change out of these entry suits that they've been wearing for the last several hours and make their way onto those helicopters for the flight home. And once they make their way back to Karaganda, where the airplanes will be waiting, they'll sometimes take part in a welcoming ceremony, a traditional Kazakh welcoming ceremony, before saying farewell. These 3 crew members have been training together for the last several years and just spent a little under 139 days on board the International Space Station, and they'll split off. Bresnik and Nespoli bound for back here in Houston on board the waiting NASA plane, and Sergei Ryazanskiy will head back to his home base at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia. Again, for Randy Bresnik, this just wrapped up his 2nd space flight. He had flown on 1 shuttle mission, STS-129. This was his first long-duration stay, and he was the commander of Expedition 53. And a successful end to a successful mission today. Getting some thumbs up and some excited signs from all of the crew members.
Николай Ефимович. Николай, четыре человека, нет? Четверо?
Все хорошо, спасибо.
Everything is great, thank you.
Простите.
Или с той стороны, да?
Так, дальше вы все. Главное, ребят, не шатайте. Военным нельзя.
Let's go.
And as you can see, they're going to start carrying them to the medical tent. They usually don't linger too long when it's this cold outside, wanting to get the crew in warmer climates as quickly as possible. So one at a time, starting off with the Soyuz commander, Sergei Ryazanskiy, making his way, followed closely behind by Paolo Nespoli, the Italian astronaut with the European Space Agency. And then just behind them will be NASA's Randy Bresnik. Just in the background there, you can actually see the Soyuz parachute still spread out over the ground.
Ты молодец, что выбрался.
And there you can see that orange medical tent.
We're almost there. Go to the left.
Середину.
I'm not gonna be able to make it, dude.
And so just like that, all three crew members now in the medical tent. Again, they'll get a chance to get out of those SOCA launch and entry suits that they've been wearing for the past several hours. And meanwhile, teams with the search and recovery forces and the various space agencies will work to start removing some of the samples that the Soyuz returned. Soyuz is capable of returning a small amount of cargo, typically returning samples from various medical studies, some samples from the crew members themselves, all of the fun stuff, the blood, the urine, and the other samples that they take throughout their time on board the International Space Station. Much of it kept in refrigerated cold bags that's then handed off to the various space agencies for return. For NASA, we'll be bringing samples back here to Houston, along with the samples with Paolo Nespoli and the European Space Agency. But that work ongoing while the crew is inside the medical tent. And again, they'll get out of their SOCA launch and entry suits, undergo just some additional medical checks, and change into some more comfortable clothes, typically one of their flight suits, and then make their way onto those waiting helicopters. As we heard my colleague Brandy Dean with NASA Public Affairs, who is on the scene there in Kazakhstan, report, they're going to be heading back to Karaganda, so that's a several-hour helicopter ride. You can see it to the northeast of the landing zone. And once they get there, there will be two waiting planes, a NASA plane waiting to take Randy Bresnik and Paolo Nespoli back here to Houston, and then a plane from the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center to take Sergei Ryazanskiy back to his home base in Star City, Russia. Those planes allow us to get the crew members back here as quickly as possible to continue medical testing and other scientific testing. That's just because they're off the International Space Station. The work, unfortunately, not done for these crew members yet. They'll participate in a number of different studies over the next several months just to track how they readapt to a gravity environment after spending a long duration of time on board the International Space Station in a microgravity environment. But for now, everything looking great. These three crew members, Paolo Nespoli, Sergei Ryazanskiy, and Randy Bresnik, back on planet Earth, looking great, and everything going very successfully with today's landing operation. And so we'll hang out on the air for just a little bit longer, see if we get any replays from the landing or any more views from the landing zone. And again, just standing by, seeing if we'll get any more video from that landing zone in Kazakhstan. Again, the landing coming right on time at 2:37 a.m. Central, 3:37 a.m. Eastern. All the crew members at this point extracted from the Soyuz capsule into the medical tent to get out of their suits and begin the trek to Karaganda via helicopter, and then the flights back to home base for two of those. For Randy Bresnik and Paolo Nespoli, that's going to be a flight back here to Houston on a NASA plane. And then for Sergei Ryazanskiy, the flight back to Star City and the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. And while we wait for those replays, we'll kick it over to some Earth views. The International Space Station and Expedition 54 still circling the globe. Right now, the crew just passed over the southern tip of South America again. Are about to swing up over the southern part of the Atlantic Ocean. But again, just standing by, seeing if we'll get any more replays of the Soyuz spacecraft as it descended under its parachutes in that final stage of the landing. But just to recap, all went extremely well with tonight's activities. The landing coming right on time in Kazakhstan at 2:37 a.m. Central. The crew all looking great, already out of the capsule, into the medical tent, and pretty soon starting that trip home. All right, looks like we won't be able to get any more replays from the landing, so with that, we are going to head and wrap up our coverage. So just to recap for you, successful landing today, 3 crew members from Expedition 53, Randy Bresnik from NASA, Sergei Ryazanskiy from Roscosmos, and Paolo Nespoli from ESA, the European Space Agency, left the International Space Station in just under 3.5 hours later. Touchdown in snowy Kazakhstan at 2:37 a.m. Central, 3:37 a.m. Eastern, bringing to close to their time on board the International Space Station, just shy of 139 days spent on orbit, and now safely back down on the ground. They'll begin the trek back to Karaganda and then back to the respective home countries. Randy Bresnik and Paolo Nespoli coming back here to Houston, and then Sergei Ryazanskiy getting a flight up to the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, Russia. So I want to thank you for joining us throughout all of our broadcasts this evening, especially with this landing, getting some really spectacular views, and just another great insight and another great night in human spaceflight and for the International Space Station program. This is just the beginning of a busy week. We'll be back this weekend with the launch of the 3 newest crew members headed to the International Space Station, the Expedition 54 crew. So be sure to tune back in for another late night viewing here as we continue to follow along with the mission on the International Space Station. For now, though, we are going to go ahead and sign off. This is Mission Control Houston.